Good evening and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our second in the series on exploring the faculty of judgment through the ancient judges of Israel, the judges of ancient Israel. I want to thank those of you who wrote in some feedback. I truly appreciate that, so I can know exactly how much you're understanding. I even received some suggestions, and I tried my best to get it ready for today, but for sure I will have an easel for next time. The maps are a different story, but I will also try to scan the maps and make sure that if that interests you, that you have a sense of the geography that is symbolic of those places in consciousness where judgment plays a part. And so as we begin our time together, I would like to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Become still and get centered in that place that we call the secret place of the Most High. From that place, we can judge righteous judgment. We see rightly as God sees. From the secret place of the Most High, we receive impeccable guidance, flawless guidance for every moment, for every step of the way. It is judgment that you can trust. It is judgment that you can act upon and be sure that the results are for the highest good. And so for a few moments in the silence, let us call forth, let us recognize our faculty of judgment, that foundational faculty that functions within us every day and plays such a key role in our lives, in our bodies, states of mind, and generally quality of our lives. And let us call that forth. Recognize our faculty of judgment in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have this God-given faculty of judgment that we have access to, that allows us to make conscious choices in every moment, leading to spiritual growth and the highest good for all concerned. And for an awareness of that truth that sets us free. We are so grateful, and we do give thanks in the name and through the power of the Christ that lives within us all. Amen. If you're having any technical difficulties, and Mark and I did check on this ahead of time, but if you're having any difficulties viewing or watching or hearing, email Mark at truthunity.net. We will, as always, have a period for questions, and I do encourage you to call in, ask questions, make comments. I recognize that this is new material for a lot of you, and so please don't be shy. I feel gratified if I can help even one of you see yourself in the Bible. That's the whole point of metaphysical interpretation. We call that love of the Bible, when we are able to see ourselves not just as the good guys, so to speak, but that all aspects of the story, all locations that are mentioned are extremely important in terms of what it means for us. And eventually we become that story. But for metaphysical interpretation, we just see those individual planes of consciousness which give us insight into our own decision-making process. If we make unconscious decisions or decisions out of a conditioned response, we tend to get, as Charles Fillmore says, a great deal of suffering, which is why Jesus warned us about this faculty, and he said, "Judge not by appearances, but judge righteous judgment." We do say in unity that we believe in one power and one presence, one life, one mind, one source, and yet the questions that we can ask ourselves, something like this. So yes, I believe that God is the source of my prosperity, but where do you look when you make your decision about, let's say the bank account is low, or the job has faded away, or the economy generally isn't doing well? So do you make your decisions based on that, or based on the truth that there is only one source, no need to worry? For most things at this stage of evolution, we believe in lack and abundance. We believe in sickness and in our capacity to heal. We believe in the double. We believe in God's presence and in God's absence, as we will see in these stories. And so the idea is to see all aspects of the story as necessary parts of consciousness within us. Last week we talked about Deborah. Deborah is really an example of being at the space in consciousness where righteous judgment can be made. I wrote down a few of the characteristics of Deborah, and by way of review, I would like to show how you can take just a few details from this story and know a great deal about how judgment works from that place of fine discrimination, and how it interacts in right relationship to will, represented by Barak. Okay, she is, first of all, she is called a prophetess. Now, a prophetess, she's the only woman mentioned as a prophetess, which means that she has such fine discernment that she is a mouthpiece for God. She sees the reality from the intuitive level of her own being, and then she speaks the word of truth, which is why we see that she gets very specific guidance, makes wise decisions very quickly. She is also described as the wife of Lapidoth. Now you think, oh, well, that's just the name of some guy. Well, no. Here's where your metaphysical Bible dictionary comes in handy. That is an idiom which means something akin to the Holy Spirit. Lapidoth means the radiation of light and the spreader of light. She is married to that light. Okay. Also, Deborah's name means bee. Very fine discrimination. And where is it in consciousness that we have that refined discrimination? When you go into the silence, there is what we call the still point, or in science it's called the point of singularity. Imagine the hourglass which comes to that one point that separates the formed from the formless. It is there that we hear most clearly that still small voice of guidance. And with judgment, turn left, turn right. Okay? Do this and not that. Act or wait. You get very clear guidance, and that is the discrimination of that faculty of judgment. There's not the clutter and the noise of other influences to mold some other opinion or authority that you might have looked to make that decision. I want you to look at the numbers. This description of Deborah is found in chapter 4, verse 4. That number 4 represents foundation. Okay, 4 square. Chapter 4, verse 4. She's a beautiful example of the kind of discrimination that you want to have leading your consciousness into higher growth. Now, I should also mention that the solar plexus is the location of this faculty. The location is important. This is something that Charles Fillmore located for each faculty, so we could know what part of the body is most affected. Perhaps you remember the story of Solomon, who, when asked by God, what did he want? And he said he wanted an understanding heart. An understanding heart. The marriage of love and judgment. Solomon means sun man, solar, located here at the solar plexus. And when he judged wisely. The story of the two women who were fighting over a child, and he didn't say, now get good lawyers and let's see if we can dig up some evidence from some witnesses. No, he knew intuitively that the real mother would not have the child killed. So he said, bring a sword and we'll cut this child in half. And true to form, the real mother said, oh, no, don't do that. Better that she should have it than that the child should die. All right, and so that is the kind of not judging from that human level, but judging from that level which is infallible and always leads to the good result. All right. The other important symbol that helps us understand Deborah is the palm tree. The palm tree, as we talked about, the fibers of it are very strong and actually are used for building structures, just as our thinking process, according to the decisions that we make, build thought structures in our world. So we want those thought structures to be a strong foundation, because she had spiritual understanding and knew that those thought structures brought form into being. Okay? When we have a thought, it's more like there are lots and lots of thoughts that go to support that, but if the foundation is that you're living life from the level of appearance, your structures are not going to be very sound. They will not stand up in times of difficulty. It's an interesting story that when she becomes aware of the problem right away, and we talked about the cycle that these Israelites go through, she became aware. It says the people were complaining about the Canaanites. What are the Canaanites? Well, they're not just some tribe, but they are the people who live in the promised land, who are hostile to the incursion of the Israelites. They are people who live with agriculture, and they are hostile to the Israelites. And because they're agricultural, they have different gods. And the people of Israel, and we will see this more clearly with Gideon in just a few minutes, the people of Israel have to learn to do agriculture. And so they get involved with the gods of those who are successful in agriculture. And that's what displeases the Lord. All right. So God gets angry and brings oppression upon the people. Okay. So here Israel is being oppressed by these Canaanites. And then the people cry out for help, and the Lord sends a judge. So they go to Deborah and they say, help, these Canaanites are oppressing us. And here she is sitting under her palm tree, and it's like ... She gives the instructions very quickly, receives the guidance. She calls on Barak, representing our faculty of will. But it's a spiritualized faculty of will, a willingness to serve intuition. All right. Generally, a man, especially a general like Barak, is going to be willful and represent that faculty of will that is dominating. But Barak, and she lets him know, he's not going to get credit for defeating the Canaanites. He has to give credit over to the intuitive faculty. And she tells him exactly what to do. Go to Mount Tabor, gather together 10,000, numbers are important, 10,000 men. Okay, they don't use weapons in these spiritual battles, which is very much like Jericho. All right, no weapons, just gather your men from 10,000 of them from Naphtali, that faculty of strength. Call, yes, you're going to need a lot of inner strength, that power of the mind to accomplish, and you're going to need Nebulun. Nebulun is the faculty of divine order, and it has to do with right timing, sequence of unfoldment. And so Barak does that without question. And then she goes with him and meets them up there, and meanwhile she calls out the people of the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, they're being the consciousness of physicality, purely human consciousness, that pretty much live and traffic in materiality. And Deborah knew that the rain was coming, and these people who outnumbered them and had more weapons and all of that, they could not stand up in the wet season, and their chariots got bogged down in the whole thing. And so, yes, Barak got rid of them all at once, but the general escaped. That's like getting rid of all the symptoms, but not the cause. Okay, so the cause, that a fundamental belief in consciousness, that misperception, that this is the reality that you see, touch, hear, and smell. That's the reality. And so he flees, and of course Barak and all are in hot pursuit. And he winds up with Jael, who he seeks refuge there, he seeks hospitality, it is given. But she, and here again, these names are important, she represents that kind of wild, untamed consciousness that is just beginning to turn her allegiance towards spirit. And even that untamed consciousness makes some spiritual growth by being loyal to a glimmer of the spirit of truth. And she does in the general. Think of a tent stake. What's a tent stake for? It's to anchor the tent to the ground. She puts that anchor, that stake, right through his temples, so that intellect and ego is cut off from the source. So that's the story of Deborah, and I know I went over those details last week, but I want to emphasize how the Bible teacher, Michael Segru, said the Bible is all music and no noise. Every single detail is important, and become aware of the numbers. If you feel confused about a passage, you can look at the chapter and verse number and decipher a great deal. One other point is that with spiritual, when you decide to meet your challenge using spiritual means, it's the preparation and the strategies come from consciousness. Create the conditions in consciousness that then make the outer result possible. Okay? It has to happen inside first, and then we can bring it forth. Eric Butterworth said, create the conditions in consciousness that make the result inevitable. Okay. Now, so ask yourself questions. How do you identify with each of these characters? I would say to identify with Deborah, you need to have a meditation practice that actually takes you to that level. If you've ever had that precise, strong voice of guidance coming through you, that's Deborah. And you know that that is the way to go. It's not, you don't sort of go back and forth and weigh your options. That is Deborah. But we also have Canaanites within us. We have times when we fall back on our human thinking or on our conditioned responses. And when a challenge comes up, sometimes we go there first, and then we remember. It's just not a linear progression. Just like you don't meditate once and think it's done. There's a lot of work to be done to purify consciousness so that we can function with that full potential. All right, we also have Sisera, or Barak within us. You know, that willingness to allow God to work in and through us and serve that intuition. If you have strong intuition, you trust it, you act upon it, you know that the results will be there, and you are willing to do something with it. Okay, that's Barak. All right, we have that. Maybe. And we also have Sisera. Sisera's name means boiling over with anger. It's kind of domineering. That's the other side of the will. Generals and kings, and they all represent the power of that willfulness of the one in charge. Okay. And maybe we have a Jael within us as well. She's the one who gets the credit in the Song of Deborah. It's really the intuitive that wins the battle, and not the armies. Very, very interesting. It's not the will, but it's the power of spiritual discernment that claims the day. So I hope that's clear, because now we're going to move on to Gideon, who is a different story. Gideon means destroyer. And so here is the faculty of judgment working with the faculty of renunciation. All right. in contrast to Deborah, he is sitting under an oak tree. That is, he has this vision of the Lord while sitting under an oak tree. Oak tree represents great strength. Okay, now if you have your Bibles, and I hope you do, turn to Judges chapter 6, verse 1. And right off the bat, you find the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. This is fearsome. Midianites, that represents inner strife, the contention that absolutely destroys your peace of mind. And 7 years, that is really a complete cycle of breakdown in consciousness. These Midianites, what would be the qualities of Midianites? It would be things like uncharitable thoughts. It would be petty quarrels. It would be jealousies. It would be resentments, desire to get even, that sort of thing. Those are the things that are the Midianites within us. And as you see here, it keeps them from functioning. Here's what happens. And the hand of Midian prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves dens, which are in the mountains, and the caves, and the strongholds. They were so afraid of the Midianites that they hid themselves away in the subconscious. Okay. For whenever the Israelites put in seed, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up and attack them. They would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the land. Okay, you can't be productive. Okay, here and now the Israelites are depending upon agriculture, and when they put seed in the ground, here come the Amalekites. In other words, you can speak a word of truth, and with this inner turmoil, nothing comes forth. Okay, no accomplishment at all. Okay. And they were everywhere, for they would come up with their cattle and their tents, coming like locusts for number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they wasted the land as they came in. All right? They break down the wholeness, the integrity that is within consciousness. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried for help to the Lord. So here we have the cycle going all over again. So here in the next section, we find Gideon in prayer saying, "Why is this happening to us?" Have you ever cried to the Lord and said, "Why is this happening to me? Why me?" And he gets an answer. He's a judge. And it says, "I sent you a prophet and you didn't listen. And here you are worshiping the gods of these Midianites." All right. So he says, "I am the Lord your God. You shall not pay reverence to the gods of the Amorites," another form of Canaanites, in whose land you dwell, but you have not given any heed to my voice. So there's his answer. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak at Ophrah. Okay, that's a name of a place, which means, this is a lovely name. It means female fawn. Okay, very graceful, very gentle, because guidance can be very gentle and very subtle. And it said, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash. Joash is the father of Gideon, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Now this is an idiom, beating out wheat. That is separating the wheat from the chaff, separating in consciousness truth from error, separating the sheep from the goats, all right? And he's doing it inside the winepress so that the Midianites won't see him. Interesting. So, what does he do? The first thing he does is he builds an altar to the Lord. You see, he gets it right. He hears why it is that all this trouble has come upon them. So he builds an altar to the Lord, makes that firm place in consciousness. It's like making a commitment and putting your stake in the ground. And then he destroys the altar to Baal. All right, Baal, the god, the agricultural god. So the people, they get up in the morning and they say, who did this? You know, and they were ready to really get on Gideon and do him in. And his father stands up for him and says, if Baal is the god that you think he is, then let him contend for himself. And so Gideon is then given his mission. And his mission is to destroy the Midianites as one man. Woo! All at once. Destroy the Midianites. So here, Gideon is funny. First he says, if I have found favor, as you said, I need a sign. I need a sign that you really are the God of Israel. He said, so wait here. I'm going to go and bring you an offering. So he prepares the meat, and he prepares the broth, and he prepares the barley cakes. And by the way, barley is means that the person is poorer than the one who does wheat. He was a barley farmer. And he brings them all back, and the Lord says, okay, now lay out your food on the rock, pour the broth over it, and he takes his staff, just like Moses, and then he puts it in and it goes whoosh, and there's this burst of fire, and then the angel of the Lord disappears. Okay, so there's proof, there's his sign. He's satisfied with that. Then we go on, and okay, we're on now verse 14. And it says, and the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and deliver Israel from the land of Midian. Do not I send you? In other words, get to work. All right? I'm going to be with you. As God always said with the Israelites, all right? I will be with you. Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Behold. And here he sounds like Moses. Oh, but my clan is the weakest, and I'm the smallest one in Manasseh. Manasseh means understanding. I am the weakest one in understanding, and I am the least in my family. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall smite the Midianites as one man. They're scary, these Midianites. Okay, so then that's where he gets the sign. And he says, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Okay? That's when you have a direct experience. Notice also that Gideon had a vision. Like Joseph, when Joseph had a vision too, saying, take Mary and the baby and go to Egypt. That happens in a dream or a vision. It was not direct intuition. The woman represents that. And so after he does his little, gets his sign, then he says, now I've seen the Lord face to face. Okay, not just in a dream. The dream was real. But the Lord said to him, peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar, and then he tore down the Baal. I told you that part of it. Okay, then he and then his father defends him. So here come the Midianites. They've crossed the river, and here they are. And Gideon has to ask for another sign. And he's saying, in his mind, he is saying, will you really deliver the Midianites into my hand? And if this is really true, then I'm going to put this fleece out, and if the dew falls only on the fleece and not on the ground, then that will be a sign. So he gets the sign. But then he thinks, but what if I didn't get that? Have you ever had a time when you say, I got that guidance, but I'm just not really sure if that's right? I think I'll ask again. So he says, okay, now please, God, don't be mad at me, but what if the dew falls only on the ground and none of it on the fleece? And so that happens. So then he is convinced. I find this part coming up the most interesting because Gideon starts out by sending a message everywhere, and he ends up with like 32,000 men coming to help him. He thinks he needs a lot of help, right? And so when they come, the Lord says, you have too many men. How can I deliver Israel? How can I deliver Israel with all these men? He said, so here's the test. All those who are afraid, send them home. So 22,000 of them went home. Okay, 22,000. 2,200. That is representing, in this case, duality multiplied. When we're in a state of duality, like believing in victory and fearing defeat, that is a state of duality. That is not a strong state of mind. Okay, remember, it's one power and one presence, and he has all these guarantees that God is going to be with him. And so, the Lord says, okay, this is still too many. He has, how many does he have left? 10,000? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so they have to pass another test because the number is still too great. So he says, okay, take them down to the water. And if they lap the water like a dog, those people go here. But if they kneel down and dip, and presumably dip a cup into the water, then you leave those people over here. And so it turned out that there were 300 significant number, who all lapped water like a dog. So for all of you listening at home, I ask you if you can discover what that test is about. Okay, remember, this is about the faculty of judgment working with the faculty of renunciation. Okay, so the destroyer, Gideon, the destroyer, means that that's the power of denial. It's the power of denial. We have to take back power. We've given power to the presence of God. We've given power to the absence of God. We've given power to good, and we've given power to evil. We give power to sickness. We give power to health. We give power to lack. And all right, so he has to deny power, which is not to deny what exists, but to deny means to deny the power that has been given to non-truth. All right, so in that context, then, the drinking water like a dog, all right, and I am open to any reasonable interpretation here, but to me that says that you cleanse directly and completely. Water representing cleansing. But if you kneel down and dip your cup into the water, it's like you are isolating a part of yourself. You know, you're willing to let go of a lot of things, but you have to let go of everything that you have given power to other than God. And that's Gideon. So the ones who lapped water like a dog, they get to go. And it's an amazing strategy because once again, there are no weapons. Gideon, and here he is again. He keeps losing his courage. And so he's told the strategy. But he's still wondering in his mind if God's really going to deliver these fearsome Midianites. And so the Lord says, he gets guidance to, just go check out. Go down at night and sneak into their camp and just see what they're thinking. And this is pretty much like the spies that went into Jericho. They found out the same thing, that remember when they went into Jericho, they found that the people there in Jericho were really afraid of the Israelites because their God had done so many miracles, making the sea part and all of that. Well, so they go down into the camp of the Midianites and find that they're already afraid that it has been delivered into the hands of Israel. So they believe that they're done for. So that reassures Gideon, and he uses the strategy of his guidance, which is took the 300 men, the 300 representing all three levels of our being: spirit, soul, body. We have to deny power that we've given to our gods, anything other than the one power and one presence. Take that power back. And so what they do is, and they go at night when the Midianites are sleeping, and divide this army of 300 into three parts. They are each given a jar with a torch and a trumpet. Those are their weapons. And when it's time to go down into their camp, they break the jar, and all the torches, it looks like they're coming from all directions. They blow the trumpets, and the Midianites are really so scared that they all flee. So he smites the Midianites with one man. Interesting story. That's the faculty of judgment working with renunciation. And again, we see that always to meet challenges with spirit means to prepare in consciousness first. Listen for the guidance as to the strategy. Have the courage to act on it, trust it, and know that the results are inevitable. We have a few more minutes, and I'll talk for a few more minutes about, let's see if I've missed any points. And here again, we have an incident with the two princes of the Midianites. Of course, there would be two princes because this is contention and strife and so on. So we have the one that represents golden wisdom, but which is tainted, and the other which represents the greedy, rapacious thoughts. And so their heads are cut off. It's the same thing, that human consciousness, intellectual consciousness, consciousness that is loyal to human thought constructs rather than to divine ideas and to the truth. That has to go. So it's a denial of power to that part of ourselves. The intellect is a useful tool, but it is there to serve the intuition. So the two princes of Midian have to go. Gideon is a great contrast to Deborah, who is already there, established in that place of, in the shadow of the Most High, right there in that refuge where you have that fine sense of discrimination. There's no hesitation on Deborah's part. Gideon, he keeps saying, is that really right? Kind of an interesting character. In the end, if you want to go ahead and read chapter 7 in the sequel, feel free to do that. But he ends up, the people then, they really love him and they want to make him ruler of Israel. And he says, no. Partly because in that part of the world, if you keep asking them, that means, they have to, it's kind of protocol that you turn it down a few times so that they'll keep on asking you. And then and they bring him all kinds of gifts, but he makes the fatal mistake of using these gifts to build an image, one of those false God sort of images. And anyway, so anything, Linda, that you want to ask, you always get first choice. But always ask yourself, can I relate to this within myself? Yeah.
Is it going to take me 7 years of meditating to get the many nights out?
I wish. I've been meditating for a lot longer than 7 years. No, the first step is to become aware of how unconsciously we give power to both, because we are on a spiritual path and there's no turning back. So we do believe in God, we do believe in the good, we do believe in the capacity of the Christ within us to heal and to bring abundance and to bring forth truth. We do believe that. But there are parts of us that are still, Charles Fillmore uses the word unredeemed. We have not yet lifted up all parts of our consciousness. That's why we have these faculties that support the Christ and serve as the channels for expression. So Gideon, he had to use that power of denial, but you have to first recognize where you've given your power and where that power has been expressing in your life. There's a beautiful Vedic story in India. And in India, snakes can be quite deadly. And the story goes like this, that a man walked into a dimly lit room and saw what he thought was a snake on the floor. He runs out of the house screaming, crying for help, rouses all the neighbors, the entire village, and pretty soon his whole world is built around around the presence of a snake. Well, so there's all this tumult and crying out, and finally someone says, "I'd like to see this snake." And he walks back into the room and says, "There's no snake, it's a string." So he walks out and he says, "Hey guys, good news. There's no snake, it's a string." But at that point, nobody hears him. And that's how the nervous system functions. If it's built on a limited presence, it can, on a limited belief system, it can only accept information that reinforces what it already believes. I can remember my parents reacting to they were sure there were communists around every corner, in the days of McCarthy. And that's based on, you look for what you have already established is there, and of course you find it. Okay. So I like the snake and the string because it's a false perception based on limited vision. And our whole worlds get built up out of a fear that has no basis in reality. The truth is that there is no situation and no condition that is more powerful than the power and presence of God within us. But we have to, and to to answer your question, I wish it were only 7 years. I wish it could be done in 7 years. But 7, symbolically, yes, because 7 represents the completion of a cycle. And I would say, how about 40 years? Okay, 40 ought to be enough, right? Because 40 is that number that is as long as necessary to do the job. Well, let's see. It's been 41 years. Would you believe? So, but interestingly, as you move along the path, it's not so much how much more are we there yet. It's not that kind of a situation. It's like you notice progress at every step of the way. And even when you think you have really gotten to a high point, you realize there is even more, because the depth of that consciousness within you is infinite. But I can tell you this, that you will never truly have faith in the one power and one presence until you have experienced that presence and power. And that's the whole purpose of the silence. That is the purpose of the new foundation, which is to have, clear out the old rubble. It's like rebuilding consciousness is like remodeling a house. You have to rip out all the old stuff. Charles Fillmore says you have to take down that human consciousness brick by brick and then rebuild. But if you rebuild according to the same blueprint, you're going to get the same result. And so that's why we introduce a new state of consciousness. We introduce pure energy that both helps to clear the rubble and to build that foundation. And that's the purpose of the silence in spiritual terms. It's easier to explain to a person who is in unity than it is to a person who is looking for relaxation. And believe me, I'm not knocking relaxation, but there is so much more there. But the spiritual practice, if you ever want to truly know your oneness with that source of all, you have to visit regularly, which is what we do. It's not a huge investment in time, but a lot happens in a few minutes that then gets integrated over a period of time. That was the original idea of the new foundation, was to teach people to go into the silence so that they could then have a better understanding of the Bible text, to see, and then you get these insights. I always get most of the insights the day after I do these classes, and I think, oh, yeah, where have I been like Gideon? I aspire to be like Deborah. But I'm sure I want a sign. I want a sign that I am on the right path. It reminds me of something that Jesus said. Jesus said in the Gospel of John, and he said this is when he is, the guy comes to him with and says he has a sick son, and Jesus, a servant, I guess it is, who is sick, and he wants Jesus to come down, and he said, "You people, you won't believe unless you see signs. You have to see signs before you'll believe." Instead of simply understanding the law, meaning that you can't change the law. The law works, but you have to go to the level where you can tap into it and have it work for you, work through you, I should say. So, thank you. Good question. Probably other people are wondering, how long do I have
How
to?
long does it take to get rid of it?
Yeah, I don't know. It was
At least
done.
you can recognize them.
I can remember in my first class, meditation class, when I was being instructed, there was a woman, and I was young then, 3 small children, and there was a woman there who was probably in her 60s or 70s, and when she had that vision of possibilities that come from that practice of silence, she was weeping, and she says, I've been looking, and she had done everything. She'd been in every religion, and done every technique, and she said, I have finally found it, and I don't think I will live long enough to be able to enjoy the full results of that. And I thought, well, maybe I won't either, and I'm 25 or so. But
Do you think you have?
no way. I still remember playing the role of Deborah in ministerial class. But that's sometimes what we do. We say, that's me, Deborah. And we say, but those Canaanites, those aren't me. That's not the approach that Unity takes to the Bible, it's not metaphysical study of the Bible. And then we cast judgment on Canaan. The Canaanites are there so that we can recognize that we have the capability within us to overcome them. All those thoughts that say there is only this reality out here. If I can't see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, if there's no benefit in this for me, I'm out of here. I'm sure there's a time when we all start out as physical beings in purely human consciousness. Hey, if anybody wants to call in, I will just preach on and on if you don't call in and interrupt me. So, and I do want to encourage you to call in. And again, I was very grateful for those of you who wrote and gave me feedback and told me what worked for you. And I will do my very best to have charts up for you. Particularly, I had made one, and it's right here, but I know you can't see it very well because I can't see it on the computer. And it's that cycle that they went through in those days, where they would be delivered from a challenge, and I'm sure we can relate to this. You meet a challenge, you know that you have to cry out to God to get help to overcome a challenge. You get the help, and then you're fine until you meet another challenge, and then the doubts come back. That's exactly what has happened. That's what this story is about in the story of the judges of ancient Israel. So Gideon. Next week we'll talk about Jephthah. That is a very kind of bizarre story of a judge, and we'll review some points about Gideon. And so what else? Begin to pay attention to the numbers. Even if it's just a few numbers. Okay. Good evening. Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Hi.
But I think you need to...
Okay, I turned my computer off.
Yeah. I didn't recognize the
you
number.
hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
I just want to say before I make my comment is that I can see that your little board up there pretty good. I wrote down the stuff that was on there, the point, so it is very visible. The only part, the lower part, I can't see, but the four points that you have written up there, I wrote down, so I can see it. So
okay.
I wonder.
Yeah.
I think this is very interesting. Where you're drawing the analogy between Gideon and Deborah, and the thought comes to my mind, and I wonder if there is any relationship here. In every motel you go to today, there's a Gideon Bible,
Yes.
and that's for travelers. Is there something drawn from that? Is that because of the movement, or do you know anything about that? Or can you
I
comment on
don't.
that?
I didn't even consider that. That is fascinating. And the Gideon Bible, now, I thought the Gideon Bible only had the New Testament. Is that not true?
I think you're right. I think that's true, yes.
And so that would be the destination instead of the journey. But I will look that up to see how the Gideon Bible came to be.
Yep, it's better. And it's primarily for I think, safety for travelers who are traveling.
Yes.
And I think if I remember right, it's especially for truck drivers and people hauling things across the highways, and their safety. But one thing that struck me tonight is the whole consciousness of the Midianites, and which means the inner strife, and I'm experiencing some inner strife myself right now.
Well,
and so I could relate to that.
Well,
And I guess sometimes I think, and a lot of times people will ask me, I'm experiencing that Midianite consciousness, that inner strife, so much that I cannot find my way to the Deborah consciousness or the silence. What do I do?
is that a rhetorical question, or is that because it's more about understanding that the Midianite consciousness, that is that consciousness that there are two things that are warring inside of me. The presence of God and the absence of God. So the whole purpose of recognizing that is going on is to push you deeper, because the deepest reality is that there is one power and one presence. Sometimes people do not want to go deeper, at least consciously, unconsciously don't want to go deeper, because they are afraid that one of those things they don't want to get rid of, they're going to have to. And if they're told to let go of, the foreign god, whatever that foreign god may be, that will upset their whole world. I have seen people who receive guidance and they don't like it, and so they prefer to stay in the Midianite stage. So the answer is go deeper. Go deeper.
Yeah, and I think from this story here, from Gideon's story, is that it reminds me of Jonah. No, not Jonah, but who's the other one? He went the wrong way.
No, that's Jonah. Yeah.
Right?
He was told to go here, and he goes there, the opposite. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gideon, though, through this whole process, is given and you made a good relationship with Moses, because he starts doubting himself, and I can't do this, and so forth. And then he needs some physical evidence, some signs, but yet as he works through it and goes towards the light or the silence or that inner sanctuary, he does accomplish what he was set out to do. But what's nice about this story, it really shows us that in the beginning, when we're facing challenge,
Yeah.
How could I ever do this? So
Exactly.
it's a good story, and I like the analogy. I like the contrast between Gideon and Deborah. It's very, 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 very good.
Yeah,
And you really did a good job of explaining and in a logical fashion, and especially your review was excellent. So I really enjoyed it.
well, thank you. And know that we have both Deborah and Gideon, that we have the capacity,
Right.
and it's just about the inner relationship. As long as Gideon is, and it's very much like Mary and Joseph, that at first Joseph is wanting to divorce Mary, because on the surface it looks like there was something going on there, and then he has a vision. Like Gideon, he has a vision that says, no, stay with Mary, she's pure. And then again, see, in the consciousness of, and Joseph represents understanding, but it's not the same as the intuition. You can have an understanding of the law, but without that level of intuition. Now, you can have both, but it's that the intellect and understanding has to serve the intuition. So it's about right relationship.
Right, and it really is about. It's only through the intellect is the car that brings us to the mountain, but the intuition is the one that gives us the insight to see that we can move forward through the mountain or over the mountain, I guess, if you want to use that analogy.
Right, yeah, and like when Gideon says, here's this angel of the Lord who is claiming to be, I am the God of Egypt, and who led you out of Egypt, and I am the one who did all these things, got you through the wilderness. And so that is an intellectual understanding of God as law. All right. And then when he does his little magic trick, as it were, and allows the fire to fire the presence of God, but a direct experience of the presence of God. So he says, "Oh, now I've seen God face to face." It is. Gideon is a fascinating character, and he has a few setbacks. Go ahead.
Could we say, and I know that for a long time, and I think a lot of people who study Bible metaphysics have an issue with the law. And could we say then that the law has two elements to it, the intellect and the intuitive?
Well, definitely. Let me think for a moment on that before I answer. But the law that we're talking about is the law of mind action. That is something.
Okay.
That is what is meant by law. And here, in judgment, when you make a decision, when you make an evaluation of any situation, you are activating that law of mind action, and it bears fruit. Deborah knows that. That's what the palm tree is. Okay, so if you don't know ahead of time, if you are unaware that what you are thinking, what attitude you're projecting, or the judgment that you're projecting on a situation, if you don't understand from the beginning that that's going to have an effect, you do when the effect comes back to you. And that it's at that point when you say, I get it. All right, because it comes back to you as a replica. Judge not lest you be judged. And so sometimes that comes back very quickly, and if it does come back quickly, then you make that connection. So the intuition is at work in terms of, you see how the law works, okay, in a very
Right.
experiential way. And that's when
Well,
you make changes.
yeah. Well, I see a pattern all through especially the Old Testament and the Old Testament scriptures, of the pattern of coming, getting your solution, getting your answer not on the conscious level, but on the unconscious level through dreams and visions. And George Lamsa says that is how God communicates to people in the Bible, is through dreams and visions. And I think you mentioned earlier Deborah had a direct connection, and if we could say that Gideon had it indirectly, would that be correct?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not until we have a direct experience ourselves that we then have more expressing of that Deborah consciousness. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's direct experience. And, just a simple detail that she is established where she lives is between Ramah and Bethel, right on that still small, that point where the formless becomes form, that subtlest level of consciousness. Bethel is when it becomes obvious that this is a holy place, that God is present, as Jacob said. And I didn't know it. And so, but when you're that close to the source, then your intuitions are like invincible. You can totally trust them. I feel like most of the time I'm probably, to be honest, more like Gideon. Wanting signs, but I like to fancy myself as being Deborah. I've had a few direct experiences, but
it's interesting because I think you said she's the only one,
yes,
female
yes,
in the scriptures that got direct connection.
she's
the Old Testament.
In the Old Testament. If I'll stand corrected if you can find me another one. But she's definitely the only female judge.
Right. Well, in the New Testament would be Mary, right?
Mary, yes.
Yeah.
And
And it's interesting because you don't hear much about her. You never hear ministers really praise Deborah or talk about her. Perhaps we still live in a male-oriented society. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the novel based on Deborah, but Carol Lundy wrote a hugely long novel. It's very exciting. And even though very little is known about Deborah, but enough is known to, bring forth that quality of a gifted prophetess. We all have a place within us where we are prophets, but
right.
She, as far as I know, is the only prophetess that is who is the mouthpiece of God, as was Isaiah and Jeremiah and all those, other prophets of the Old Testament. And Charles Fillmore said, hey, those prophets, they didn't just exist a long time ago. I'm one of those modern prophets. Very modestly let us know that he was a modern prophet. Yeah. But it takes direct experience for the intuitive to be fully active and lively, and for the intellect to make itself subservient to it. But it takes a strong. The intellect is governed by the ego, and I find it fascinating that the ego has to be strong and healthy before it can surrender. Isn't that an interesting paradox?
That's a good point, because a lot of people think that the ego itself is bad and we need to destroy the ego.
And that's why there's a certain book, and I think we share that opinion, where it's just totally about the ego and how bad it is. No, the ego, you know what happens to a child whose ego is just completely smashed? They grow up, kind of warped because of that.
Yeah.
But if you have strong self-esteem, you don't have a problem with a higher power, It's...
Right.
It's interesting. You're not afraid to surrender control to something that is more powerful. And that's seen by the fact that King Herod was a king for a very long time before he... Okay, so there's all kinds of clues. I love finding the clues. And...
What just came to my mind, and I've been with you a long time, especially when you were doing Adam and Eve in paradise, and the whole notion that I think of one thing that was just stuck out, and the light's been blinking since you talked that last year or whatever, is that they were not kicked out. What you just said, the ego is the child worked to be in charge, but the ego is immature, and so they weren't kicked out. They were placed out because they weren't ready, and they had to grow, and they weren't ready to make, again, I guess we could say we're talking about judgment in their capacity for judgment then, correct?
Right, because they were not, it's partly, you can see it from the point of view of the divine, too. If it is the nature of the divine and the will of the divine to express in and through its human forms, then those human forms have to be evolved to the point where they can open to accommodate that incredibly powerful energy. And so if we're going to be physical beings, I think it means that if we are born into physicality, that we're here for a reason, at a particular time, in particular situations, perhaps with a particular contract for expressing a particular quality of God, and that we stay here until that is completed. And in the process, not only accomplish something by way of uplifting the consciousness of the world, but we also grow to the point, and I'm not saying it, you can do it in one go, that you evolve, according to where you start. You have to acknowledge that people come onto this earth with different levels of understanding.
And it's really our journey is the journey back to source.
A journey back to source. And in the Kabbalah, it's a good analogy because they have the 10 qualities of God spread out over 7 branches of the tree of life, and they have the roots in heaven. And so as the energy comes down into the human form, those are the qualities that we develop. And then once they've hit the physical level, then we use those qualities to return home. So it's like involution and evolution.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to join Linda next week in your class.
Oh, excellent. Okay. She's very excited to have someone else. And I can even place a seat, Bob, so that you can be seen on the camera.
No.
The shy ones don't want to, but
Well, the important one is for you to be seen because you're the master teacher here.
oh well, thank you. It's
So, thank you very much.
it's the spirit who is the teacher. But thank you for the compliment. Good night.
Okay. Good night.